Goitrogens are substances that can inhibit thyroid hormone formation, and not all of them have to do with the thyroid, or rather with iodine per se, but cassava can. And the reason I want you to pay close attention to this one is because cassava is a major food alternative right now. And if you're following me for any length of time and you've read No Grain, No Pain, my book, and you've tried to follow a true gluten-free diet, a lot of you have gravitated toward things like cassava flour as a flour substitute. Now, that's all fine and good, but if you're doing it in mass, okay, if you're doing large quantities of cassava, and a lot of people did this originally with almonds, like almond flour everything, right? Well, cassava flour everything is now becoming more and more popular. Cassava contains a substance called thiocyanate, and this can inhibit iodine uptake into your thyroid. It can actually create a problem with being able to produce thyroid hormone. So if you're exposed or exposing yourself to large quantities of cassava, be careful. I wouldn't make it a staple food in your diet. There are cultures where cassava comes from different cultures. Some cultures in Africa use high levels of cassava, and the reason why we know this is because goiter was such a problem in these cultures. So again, cassava can inhibit iodine uptake into the thyroid because of the chemical thiocyanate. Now, tobacco can as well. So those of you, hopefully none of you listening to this show are still smoking, but there are a number of people that continue to smoke. And the cyanide in cigarette smoke can form thiocyanate, and that can also inhibit iodine uptake into the thyroid. So we don't like to see pregnant women smoking, or for that matter, anyone smoking. And one of the reasons why has to do with, with this connection between your iodine uptake. So tobacco, you want to keep it out for sure. Now, we also have other goitrogens that are commonly talked about, and those are your cruciferous vegetables. I've seen people panic over this one because, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, these are examples, cabbage, these are examples of cruciferous vegetables. Now, unless you're just juicing massive quantities of these vegetables, you're probably not going to create a goitrogenic effect and create a goiter in your thyroid. However, that being said, if you are a heavy juicer, if you're a heavy vegan and you are using massive quantities of these cruciferous vegetables and you're struggling with brain fog and fatigue and thyroid nodules, you might want to look at your diet and manipulate it a little bit away from those goitrogenic types of vegetables. So again, that's your cruciferous vegetables. Now we've also got soy. Soy is another one, and it's more specifically, there are compounds in soy that inhibit thyroid hormone synthesis. So some of your components to soy that, a lot of you may be using soy in mass. I see it again, sometimes, not to pick on vegetarians or vegans, but this is where I'll see these two problems crop up when I see them, is in the cruciferous group. The people who use a ton of soy and soy-based products and a ton of cruciferous vegetables simultaneously, and we'll see a lot of them start to become very lethargic. Many of them will develop nodules or goiters, basically, in their thyroid gland as a result of consuming high amounts of these particular types of foods. So again, I want to be very clear. It doesn't mean you can never eat broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, or cabbage. It's not what a goitrogen means. And generally, when you cook them really, really well, cook them down really, really well, a lot of the components that are goitrogenic in the cruciferous family are neutralized as a result of cooking them. So that's another avenue. Don't eat them raw. A lot of there's a big movement for raw vegetarianism, and this is one of the problems that you might come into. It doesn't mean you can't eat them. It just means if you have a hypothyroid situation and you haven't been properly diagnosed and you're not sure whether or not you're eating too many, like, you might want to look at that and consider cutting them out. Now, that being said, we talked about the foods that are goitrogenic. Let's talk about the foods that are rich in iodine. Some of the things that you can consume that are going to be rich in iodine. Now, the big one here on this list, foods high in iodine, is seafood. If it comes out of the ocean, it's going to have more iodine in it. So seaweed is the richest substance we know of as far as iodine is concerned. Seaweed by far outranks everything on this list astronomically. But we can also get iodine from other seafood. So think fish, shrimp, that type of thing. There's a large quantity of iodine available in seafood. Now, if you're catching fish from a freshwater lake or freshwater river, you're not so much going to get the level of iodine that you're going to get, because remember, with the quantity of salt and iodine in the ocean, that's where it is taken up by the animals and by the plant and vegetation within the ocean. So if you're eating that ocean vegetation, if you're eating lots of rich saltwater based fish, you're going to get lots of iodine. As a matter of fact, some of the cultures in Japan have levels of iodine hundreds of times higher than what we might see here, and thrive and do very, very well and have very, very little to no incidence of goiters or thyroid issues. Milk can also be a good source of iodine, provided your animals are grazing on iodine-rich soils. Now, I said earlier that some soils are richer than others in terms of iodine. And so interestingly enough, Texas is one of the areas with the richest iodine in the soil. Other parts of the U.S., not so great. So maybe one more reason to move to Texas, wink, wink. Eggs also have a little bit of iodine. Potato has some iodine as well. So you can get some iodine from some other foods. Now, another source of iodine, if you're on a well and your well is drilled deep enough, a lot of the iodine is not, again, it's not on that top soil surface layer, but it can be deeper in the ground. So if your well's deep enough, there might be a substantial source of iodine coming through your well water in your diet as well. So foods on iodine, think of anything that comes out of the ocean. You know, some people ask, do you use iodinated salt? Is that something that I recommend? Not so much. I really recommend getting it from your food. If you don't like seafood, I recommend more a multivitamin, a pharmaceutical controlled regulated multivitamin where you can guarantee you're going to get the dose. The reason why the studies on salt show such a disparaging difference, you may think you're getting adequate salt, iodine, but the reality is the research shows that you might not be. So a good multivitamin, something like Ultra Nutrients that contains iodine, it's actually one of the reasons why I formulated it with iodine. A lot of people are scared to take iodine because they've been told that iodine destroys or causes hyperthyroidism, and that's very, very rare, and it doesn't really cause hyperthyroidism. It can create symptoms that feel like hyperthyroidism, but those go away the moment or within weeks of removing the iodine. So it's not really a huge mega risk for people. It's probably one of those things that's been overblown in the internet and the blogosphere. So again, seaweed, okay. If you're lucky enough to have a well that has iodine in it, that's great. But unless you're measuring that, don't rely on it. Additionally, milk. I mentioned milk, but A2 milk instead of A1 milk. A1 milk produces A1 cows produce a casein that can mimic gluten. So if you're trying to follow a gluten-free diet, A1 milk's a bad idea. But A2 milk, there's some research that shows that that's not going to create that same kind of cross reactivity that we might see with a gluten cross reactivity. The problem with A2 milk is it's very hard to find unless you find it highly processed and highly pasteurized, unless you own your own cows and milk your own cows. So not that easy to get a hold of. And then again, beyond that, egg, potato are also good sources. Chicken meat is actually a pretty decent source of iodine as well. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.